I remember standing in my own living room, frozen, as my children's toys were shoved into a box by hands that didn't belong to me. A woman I once knew only as a shadow in my husband's phone was now arranging picture frames on the mantel, frames that had once held my wedding photos. And the worst part? Everyone in town believed I was dead. Yes, dead. Because my husband, the man I gave everything to, spread the cruelest lie of all, that I was gone. He even told people that I couldn't handle life anymore and that he was left heartbroken with our children. And while the world pitied him, he moved her into my house, the house I built, the house where I raised my babies, the house I sacrificed my dreams for. I should have screamed. I should have dragged her out by her hair. But instead, I stood in silence that burned deeper than any flame. My heart was cracking, not just from betrayal, but from the unbearable thought, if I fight back, what happens to my children? So I hid the truth. I swallowed my rage. I let everyone believe his lies because I thought protecting my children's peace mattered more than protecting my name. But what I didn't know then was that silence has a price. And when that price came due, it nearly destroyed me. Do you want to know how I got here? Why I stayed quiet when I should have shouted? Why a woman like me, smart, loving, loyal, ended up erased from her own life? Stay with me. Watch, and subscribe, because this is not just my story, it's a lesson. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. My name is Rachel. I'm 36 years old, and if you had met me a few years ago, you would have seen a woman who thought she had everything. At least, everything that mattered. A husband, 2 kids, and a home that echoed with laughter more than arguments. I grew up in Ohio, the oldest of 3 sisters, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs after my father left us. I always swore I'd never let my own family fall apart the way mine did. When I met David, he felt like a dream stitched into real life. He was charming in a way that made every girl in college stop and stare, but somehow he chose me. Or at least that's what I believed. He was attentive, funny, the type of man who opened doors and made promises about forever. At 23, forever felt easy to believe in. We married young, had our first child, Lily, 2 years later, and then Jacob 3 years after that. My world revolved around bedtime stories, school projects, and Sunday pancakes. David worked long hours, but I told myself that was part of being a provider. I stayed home to keep our little world steady. People admired us. Neighbors whispered about how lucky I was. And for a long time, I believed them. But looking back, I realize now, the cracks were always there. The late nights at the office that didn't add up. The way his phone was always face down, always on silent. The sudden temper when I asked too many questions. At first, I dismissed it. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself good wives trust their husbands. Then one night, while folding laundry, his phone lit up. And before I could stop myself, I saw the name, Claire. The messages weren't subtle. They weren't work-related. They were intimate, glowing with the kind of attention I hadn't felt from him in years. My hands shook so hard the phone slipped onto the carpet. For hours I sat there, staring at the walls of our bedroom, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. The next morning, I didn't confront him. Instead, I cooked breakfast for the kids, packed their lunches, and kissed them on the head before school like nothing was wrong. Because in that moment, the fear of shattering their little world was stronger than my anger. I told myself it was just a mistake. That if I ignored it, it would go away. That women before me had swallowed worse and survived. But ignoring betrayal is like ignoring a fire. You can't pretend the smoke won't choke you. Weeks turned into months. His lies grew bolder. His absences longer. And yet, I stayed quiet. For my children, I told myself. Always for them. Then came the day I'll never forget. I walked into our church where everyone knew us as the perfect couple, and people looked at me as though I was a ghost. A friend pulled me aside, her voice trembling. "Rachel," she whispered, "I thought you were gone." At first I laughed. Gone? What kind of word was that? But when she explained, when she told me David had been telling everyone I was no longer alive, my knees nearly gave out beneath me. The whispers, the pity, The fake sympathy toward him, it all made sense. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had erased me. And when I rushed home to confront him, heart pounding, I found her, Claire, already unpacking her suitcase in my bedroom. That was the day everything I thought I knew about love, marriage, and loyalty came crashing down. And it was also the day something inside me began to break, something that would later turn into rage so powerful, it scared even me. Because if he thought he could bury me with his lies, he was about to learn just how dangerous it is to leave a woman with nothing left to lose. I stood at the doorway of my bedroom, the place where I had once whispered goodnight prayers with my children, the place where I believed love still lived, and there she was, Claire. Her suitcase was open on my bed, and she was humming a little tune like she was moving into a vacation house, not the home I had scrubbed clean on my hands and knees 100 times. When she looked up and saw me, she didn't even flinch. She smiled. A smug, satisfied smile. "Oh," she said, like she had just spotted a forgotten piece of furniture. "You're still here. Still here." The words hit me harder than any slap could. My chest rose and fell, the air burning my lungs. "What are you doing in my house?" I whispered, my voice shaking but low enough that the kids in the next room wouldn't hear. "Your house." She laughed, actually laughed. "Rachel, everyone thinks you're gone. David told me you couldn't handle the marriage anymore. That you ended it yourself." My knees buckled, but rage kept me standing. "I'm not gone. I am standing right here. And these children, my children, are right here too. You don't belong in this house." Before she could answer, David walked in. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look sorry. He looked annoyed. "Rachel," he sighed, like I was a problem he had hoped was already solved. "We've been over this." My heart dropped. "We? Over this?" He spoke as if my life, my existence, was an inconvenience to him. The children ran and then, Lily clinging to her favorite stuffed bear, Jacob rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Mommy," Lily whispered, "why is Miss Claire in your room?" The silence that followed was deafening. Claire smirked. David froze. And God help me, I didn't know what to say. So I lied. To my own children. "She's a friend. Just visiting." Because how do you tell your kids their father replaced their mother while she was still breathing? How do you look into innocent eyes and explain betrayal? That night, I lay awake in the guest room. My pillow soaked with tears, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. How long had this been his plan? Was Claire just the affair, or was she the new wife? And how much longer could I keep my silence before it swallowed me whole? The next morning, things got worse. At the school drop-off, 2 mothers wouldn't even meet my eyes. One whispered, "I thought she was gone," as if I wasn't standing 2 feet away. Another pulled her child closer, like I carried some disease. It was then I realized he wasn't just lying inside our home. He was lying to the world. To everyone. And the world believed him. Days turned into weeks. Claire's presence in the house grew bolder. She cooked meals in my kitchen. She drove my car. She even tucked my children into bed while I sat outside their room, silent, my fists clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. But the breaking point came one evening when Jacob burst into the guest room crying. "Mommy," he sobbed, "why does Dad say you don't live here anymore? Why does he say Miss Claire's going to be our new mommy?" My blood turned to ice. I held him close, rocking him, whispering, "I will always be your mommy. Always." But inside, something snapped. That was the night I decided silence was no longer an option. The rage I had been burying lit up inside me like a wildfire. I wanted to scream the truth to the whole town. I wanted to drag Claire by her hair out of my house. I wanted to destroy David for every lie, every betrayal. And for the first time, I wasn't just imagining it, I was planning it. But the moment I made that decision, an extreme event unfolded that I never saw coming. It was close to midnight. I was still awake, sitting in the dark, when flashing red and blue lights lit up the windows. Police sirens. Loud knocks rattled the front door. "Open up. Police." My children screamed from their rooms. My heart dropped. And as I rushed to the door, fear and rage battling inside me, I realized something horrifying. David was standing in the hallway, smirking, arms folded across his chest. And then it hit me, whatever was about to happen, he had set me up. The pounding on the door grew louder. My children were crying upstairs, their small voices calling out for me. My heart thudded in my chest as I opened the door, and there they were. 2 police officers, their flashlights blinding me in the darkness. "Rachel Morgan?" one of them asked firmly. "Yes," I whispered, my throat tight. "You're under arrest." The words felt like a gunshot to my chest. "What?" My voice cracked. "For what?" Before I could breathe, cold metal cuffs clicked around my wrists. My children screamed louder, rushing down the stairs in their pajamas. Lily clung to the railing, sobbing, "Don't take my mommy. Please don't take her." I twisted to look at David. He was standing in the hallway, calm as a man watching TV, his smirk hidden behind a fake mask of worry. "There must be some mistake," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I haven't done anything." But the officers didn't listen. They dragged me toward the squad car while my babies screamed for me from the porch. Claire held them back, pretending to comfort them, but I saw the flicker of victory in her eyes. At the station, they shoved paperwork in front of me. I could barely read through my tears, but one word leaped out at me like a knife: fraud. "Your husband filed a report," the officer said coldly. "Says you emptied his business account and disappeared. We have statements, bank slips, and witnesses. You're facing felony charges." My mouth went dry. My chest burned. "That's not true," I shouted. "He's lying. He's setting me up." But who was going to believe me? To them, I was already the wife who vanished, the unstable woman who supposedly left her children. And now, the criminal who stole from her own husband. I spent the night in a holding cell. The smell of sweat and rust filled my lungs as I sat on a cold bench, my hands trembling, my mind spinning. How could he do this? How could a man I once trusted with my whole life turn me into a ghost and now a criminal? By morning, I was released on bail. My sister, Emily, flew in from Chicago to sign the papers. When she saw me, she broke down in tears. "Rachel," she whispered, clutching my hands, "what has he done to you?" I couldn't answer, because the truth was too heavy, too ugly, too dangerous. Back at the house, I wasn't allowed inside. David had changed the locks. My children's drawings, my family photos, my clothes, all of it was locked behind doors I no longer had the keys to. He stood on the porch with Claire, arms around her waist, while my children peeked through the window, confused and crying. "Leave," he said coldly. "You don't belong here anymore." Those words carved into me like blades. Emily pulled me away before I lost control. She took me to a cheap motel on the edge of town. As I lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the truth sank in. David wasn't just trying to erase me. He was trying to destroy me completely. That night, Emily urged me to fight back legally. "We'll get a lawyer," she said. "We'll prove he's lying." But lawyers cost money. And the money was exactly what David had taken from me. I was trapped, broken, humiliated, until something happened that shook me out of my despair. 2 nights later, while sitting in the motel parking lot, I saw a car pull up fast. A man jumped out, pacing, his face pale with panic. He was on the phone yelling, "She knows. She found out everything. If this gets out, we're ruined." At first, I didn't think much of it. But then, I heard a name.
Claire.
I froze. The man wasn't talking about me.
He was talking about her.
And in that moment, a spark lit inside me. If Claire had secrets, if she was hiding something big enough to make a grown man panic in the middle of the night, then maybe, just maybe, I had a weapon. I leaned forward in the shadows, heart pounding, mind racing. Because for the first time since David tried to erase me, I realized something. If they wanted war, I finally had ammunition. I couldn't sleep that night. Not after what I had overheard in the motel parking lot. Claire had secrets. Big ones. The words replayed in my head over and over. She knows. She found out everything. Who was the man shouting into the phone? What did Claire know? And more importantly, could I use it? Emily noticed the fire in my eyes the next morning. "Rachel," she whispered, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said, my voice shaking with both fear and rage, "that David and Claire are not as untouchable as they think. I'm thinking they've built their little empire on lies, and if I can uncover even one of them, I'll burn it all down." Emily looked worried. "Be careful. These people have already tried to erase you. Who knows what they'll do if you fight back?"
But she didn't understand.
I had already lost everything. My reputation, my children, my home. Fear had no place left in me. The next few days, I started watching, waiting, following Claire when she left the house. My heart raced every time, terrified David would catch me, but the thought of my children's faces kept me moving. And then finally I saw it. One afternoon, Claire parked outside a clinic on the far side of town. Not a hospital, not a doctor's office, a clinic I recognized. A fertility clinic. At first, I didn't understand. But then it hit me like a freight train. She couldn't have children. All those nights she tucked my babies into bed. All the times she kissed their foreheads, pretending to be mommy. She couldn't give David children of her own. That was her secret. And suddenly, everything made sense. Her desperation to move into my home. Her eagerness to replace me. She wanted my children because she could never have her own. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. She was trying to steal the one thing in this world that still belonged to me. That night, I sat in the motel room with Emily, shaking, tears burning down my face. "She's trying to take them," I whispered. "She's trying to erase me, so she can be their mother. But she can't even have children of her own." Emily's eyes widened. "Rachel, that's it. That's the leverage. If the court knew, if people knew, David's entire story about replacing you would fall apart." Hope flickered inside me for the first time in months. But with it came a dangerous thought. Exposing Claire's secret could destroy her. And part of me wanted that. The next morning, I marched into a lawyer's office downtown. I told him everything. David's lies, the fake fraud charges, Claire moving into my home. At first, he looked skeptical, the way everyone did. But when I dropped the detail about Claire's infertility, his expression changed. "Mrs. Morgan," he said slowly, "if what you're saying is true, you may have a chance to turn this case around. If Claire is pretending to be the children's mother while hiding her own medical truth, the court will see through it." I nodded, gripping the edge of his desk so hard my knuckles turned white. "I don't just want to turn it around. I want to win. I want my children back. And I want him exposed for the liar he is." The lawyer agreed to take my case, but he warned me, "This won't be easy. David will fight back hard. And if you lose..." I didn't let him finish. "I've already lost everything. There's nothing left to take." That night, I returned to the motel feeling stronger. For the first time, I had a weapon. For the first time, I had hope. But my victory was short-lived. Because when I walked into the room, Emily was sitting on the edge of the bed, pale as a ghost, holding a piece of paper in her hands. "What is it?" I asked, my chest tightening. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Rachel, it's a court notice. David filed for full custody, and he's claiming you're unfit to be their mother." My knees nearly gave out. Full custody. The words echoed in my head, louder than the police sirens, louder than the lies, louder than anything. He wasn't just trying to erase me. He was trying to take my children away forever. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. If he wanted war, I would give him war. But I would fight on my terms. Not just with anger, not just with pain, but with every secret, every weapon, every shred of truth I could use against them. Because David forgot one thing. He may have erased my name, but I was still alive. And I was done being silent. The courtroom smelled of old wood and cold air. My hands shook as I sat at the plaintiff's table, my lawyer by my side, while David walked in wearing a polished suit and that smug smile that made my stomach twist. Claire followed close behind, dressed in cream, her hand resting dramatically on his arm as though she had every right to be there. And then came the dagger. When my children walked in with them. Lily's hair was tied in neat braids Claire had probably done that morning. Jacob held David's hand, confused, his little eyes darting between me and Claire. My heart cracked into 1,000 sharp pieces. I wanted to run to them, hold them, promise them everything would be okay, but I was chained by invisible walls. David's lawyer stood tall, presenting me as the villain. Your Honor, Rachel Morgan abandoned her home, her marriage, and her children. She is unstable, financially reckless, and a danger to the well-being of the minors. My client, Mr. Morgan, seeks full custody to ensure the children's safety. Every word was a knife. Lies stacked on lies, and the people in the gallery nodded like sheep, swallowing his performance. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled. I never abandoned my children. I love them. I have been erased by my husband's lies. David leaned back in his chair, smirking like he had already won. Claire dabbed her eyes with a tissue, fake tears for a fake performance. For a moment, I felt the fight slipping away. The judge's expression was hard to read, the room heavy with doubt. I could almost hear the whispers. She's unstable. She's the ghost who came back from the dead. But then my lawyer stood. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at me, and then pulled out a folder. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady. Before you make your judgment, there is information about Mrs. Claire Daniels that this court should hear. Claire's face drained of color. David shifted in his seat. The lawyer continued, It has come to our attention that Ms. Daniels has been misrepresenting herself as a mother to the children in question. In fact, medical records confirm she is unable to have children of her own, which raises a very serious question. Why is she so invested in erasing the children's biological mother? Gasps filled the courtroom. Claire shot to her feet. That's not relevant. That's my private. The judge slammed the gavel. Sit down, Ms. Daniels. David's mask cracked. His smirk vanished, his face red with fury. He leaned over and whispered something to Claire, but the damage was already done. My children turned to look at her, confused, as if they were seeing her for the first time. Lily tugged at her braid and whispered something I couldn't hear. Claire's eyes filled with panic. And in that moment, I felt power. Real power. For the first time since this nightmare began. The truth was on my side. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Morgan, these are very serious allegations. If you and Ms. Daniels have been misleading the court, it will weigh heavily in my decision. David opened his mouth, but the judge raised his hand. Save it for later. The session adjourned, but the energy in the room had shifted. People were no longer looking at me like I was invisible. They were looking at David and Claire like maybe, just maybe, they weren't the perfect couple after all. When the gavel fell, I exhaled for the first time in months. My lawyer leaned in and whispered, That was just round one. But they'll come back swinging. Be ready. Outside the courthouse, Emily hugged me tight. You turn the tables, Rachel. Did you see her face? She was terrified. Yes, I said, my eyes locked on the doors where David and Claire were storming out. But scared people are dangerous. And I know David. He won't stop until he buries me. I wasn't wrong. Because later that night, as I returned to the motel, I found something slipped under my door. A photograph of me, asleep in the motel bed. My blood froze. My stomach twisted. Someone had been in my room, watching me, and scrawled across the back of the photo in David's handwriting were 4 words that made my heart drop into darkness. You'll never win, Rachel. I stared at the photograph until my vision blurred. My chest heaved, my hands shook, and the room felt like it was closing in on me. Someone had been here. Someone had stood over me while I slept, close enough to capture my vulnerability on film. I wasn't safe. Not even in the shadows of this cheap motel. Emily rushed over, grabbing the photo. Oh my God, Rachel, this is sick. He's stalking you. He wants you terrified. Terrified didn't even begin to cover it. Every creak in the motel walls made me jump. Every shadow outside the window felt like eyes watching me. For the first time, I thought about running, disappearing, taking a bus across state lines and starting over under another name. But then Lily's laugh echoed in my memory. Jacob's sleepy hugs. My children's eyes, wide with confusion as they watched me dragged away in handcuffs.
No.
I wasn't running. I was done being hunted. I was going to hunt back. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I started digging. I remembered the man in the parking lot, the one yelling into his phone about Claire. I had written down his license plate. Now, I used every favor, every contact Emily, and I could pull until I had a name. Thomas Reed. I didn't know who he was to Claire, but I knew he was the crack in their armor. The next day, I waited outside his office. He was jittery, glancing over his shoulder, his phone glued to his ear. When he finally stepped out, I followed him to a bar on the edge of town. He drank like a man trying to forget something heavy. And when he stumbled outside into the alley, I cornered him. "Thomas," I said, my voice sharper than I ever thought I could sound. He spun, eyes wide. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Rachel Morgan. The woman your friend Claire is trying to erase." His face went pale. He glanced around, like he expected someone to be listening. I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," I snapped. "I heard you. That night in the parking lot. You said she knew. You said everything would be ruined. What's her secret, Thomas? Tell me." He tried to push past me, but I grabbed his arm. "If you don't talk, I'll drag you into court myself. You think David's the only one who can play dirty?" He froze. His jaw clenched. Then, slowly, he exhaled. "You don't understand," he whispered. "If this comes out, it doesn't just ruin her. It ruins me." "Good," I hissed. "Then maybe you'll finally understand what it feels like to lose everything." He looked at me, torn, guilt flickering in his eyes. And then the truth spilled out. Claire hadn't just been David's mistress. She had been running a scam, convincing wealthy men to invest in fake business deals, using relationships as her hook. And Thomas? He was her partner. But here's the kicker. David knew. He knew, and he still moved her into my home. Still let her near my children. Because in his twisted mind, her lies didn't matter as long as she stood beside him against me. My stomach twisted, but my rage burned hotter. Finally, I had them. Proof they weren't just liars. They were criminals. I leaned closer, my voice a low growl. "You're going to testify. You're going to give me everything I need. Or I swear, Thomas, when this burns down, I'll make sure you're the first one buried." He swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll talk. Just don't drag me down with them." I walked away from that alley with my head high for the first time in months. My heart still hurt, my children were still out of reach, but I finally had something sharp in my hands. Evidence.
Power.
A weapon. But when I returned to the motel, my stomach dropped. The door was wide open. The lamp was smashed on the floor. And Emily was gone. In her place was another photograph. This time, it wasn't of me. It was of Emily, tied to a chair, her eyes wide with terror. And underneath, in David's handwriting, were 5 words that made my blood run cold. "Choose, your sister or your kids." The photo shook in my hands. Emily's terrified eyes stared back at me, her wrists bound, a gag across her mouth. My throat tightened until I couldn't breathe. "Choose," the note said. "Choose your sister or your kids." I dropped to my knees, the weight of it crushing me. My heart split in two. How could I possibly decide? Emily was my blood, my only anchor in this storm. But my children, they were my soul, the reason I was still fighting. David wasn't just cruel. He was monstrous. Emily's voice echoed in my memory. "Be careful. These people will stop at nothing." And now I understood. He wasn't satisfied with ruining my name. He wanted to break me until there was nothing left. I couldn't let him win. I called Thomas, my voice shaking but urgent. "It's worse than I thought. He's escalated. He's threatening my sister." Thomas cursed under his breath. "Rachel, if he's capable of that, you need to go to the police." I laughed bitterly. The police? They already see me as the crazy wife. David's their golden boy. No, this ends another way. A long silence. Then Thomas whispered, "You're really going to do it, aren't you?" Yes, I said, my hands trembling. I'm going to end this. Tonight. With Thomas's reluctant help, I traced the location of the photo. An abandoned farmhouse just outside town, the place where Claire and Thomas once met investors for their fake deals. It was the perfect place for David to hide Emily. The sun was setting as I drove there, my body electric with terror and rage. My lawyer had warned me to wait for court. Emily would have begged me not to risk it. But this wasn't about laws anymore. This was about survival. The farmhouse loomed in the darkness, its windows broken, its walls sagging. My footsteps crunched on gravel as I approached. My heart hammered so loudly, I thought it might give me away. Inside, the air smelled of dust and rot. And then I heard it, a muffled cry. Emily, I hissed. I followed the sound, and there she was, tied to a chair, just like in the photo. Tears streaked her face, but when she saw me, her eyes lit with desperate relief. Rachel, she sobbed through the gag. I rushed to untie her, but before I could finish, a voice cut through the dark. Well. I froze. David stepped out of the shadows, a gun gleaming in his hand. And beside him, Claire, her face twisted with triumph. You just don't learn, do you? David sneered. You should have stayed gone. But no, you had to keep clawing your way back.
And now?
You've lost everyone. Let her go, I whispered, my voice breaking but steady. Take me if you want, but let my sister go. He laughed. Oh, you don't get to make demands, Rachel. You're nothing now. A ghost. A memory. My fists clenched. My chest burned. And something inside me snapped. I may be nothing, I said, my voice sharp as glass. But you, David, you're a liar, a thief, a coward. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. His smirk faltered, just for a second. Claire shifted uneasily, her eyes darting toward the door. And then, before I could blink, Thomas stepped into the room. But this time, he wasn't shaking. He wasn't weak. He was holding a recorder in his hand. Actually, Thomas said, his voice low, she's not alone. David's face drained of color. Thomas pressed play. And suddenly, the farmhouse filled with David's own voice, recorded from a call he'd made to Thomas just days before. His voice bragging about framing me for fraud, about spreading lies that I was gone, about how Claire would replace me as the mother of my children. Claire's face crumpled. David's hand trembled on the gun. You bastard, she whispered. You dragged me into this, but it was all about her, wasn't it? It was always about Rachel. Shut up, he roared. But in that split second of chaos, Emily kicked her chair backward, slamming into his knees. The gun went off, the sound splitting the air. I screamed. And when the smoke cleared, David was on the ground, the gun skittering across the floor. Blood pooled beneath his shoulder. He groaned in pain, his eyes wide with shock. Claire screamed and backed away, clutching her head. And I stood there, shaking, staring down at the man who had tried to erase me. The man who had once been my husband. The man who now lay broken at my feet. The farmhouse was chaos. David writhed on the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his groans mixing with Claire's shrill cries. Emily sobbed against me, her arms shaking as she clung to my waist. The gun lay just inches from David's hand. For a split second, our eyes locked, his wild and desperate, mine burning with something I hadn't felt in years. Power. I kicked the gun across the floor. Not this time, I spat. Thomas's recorder still played David's voice, his confessions, his plans, his arrogance. Evidence.
Proof.
The truth finally out in the open. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone, maybe Thomas, must have tipped them off. For the first time, David's mask cracked. He looked small, pathetic. The man who had stolen everything from me was reduced to a whimpering mess, begging, Rachel, please. Don't let them take me. I laughed bitterly. You already took me. You erased me. You tried to bury me. Now it's your turn to be buried by the truth. The police stormed in moments later. Guns drawn, orders shouted. Within minutes, David was handcuffed, pale and sweating, his blood soaking through his shirt. Claire stood frozen, her hands raised, her eyes darting between me and the officers, as if realizing for the first time the full weight of what she'd done. Emily and I were rushed outside into the cool night air. She sobbed into my shoulder, whispering, "It's over, it's finally over." But it wasn't, not yet. The trial dragged on for weeks. David tried everything, claiming I set him up, twisting stories, painting himself as the victim. But Thomas's recordings, Claire's reluctant testimony, and Emily's rescue shattered every lie he told. The jury didn't even deliberate long. Guilty. On every count: fraud, extortion, kidnapping, attempted murder. David's face was a mask of fury when the verdict was read, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. But for the first time in years, he was the one behind bars and I was free. Claire tried to salvage her own name, painting herself as another victim of his manipulation. Maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. Either way, I didn't care anymore. She had to live with her choices.
Me?
I finally had my children back. The first night they came home, they ran into my arms like they hadn't seen me in a lifetime. And in many ways, they hadn't, not the real me, not the mother who refused to give up. I held them close, breathing them in, promising myself I'd never let anyone come between us again. Months later, I stood at the edge of the city, looking out at the skyline. Life wasn't magically fixed. There were scars, deep ones. But I was no longer living in David's shadow. Emily was safe. Thomas had begun piecing his life back together. And me? I wasn't the woman David had tried to erase. I was stronger, sharper,
Whole.
My children's laughter floated from the park nearby. I smiled, a real smile, the kind I thought I'd lost forever. David would rot in prison, a forgotten name, a ghost of the man he once pretended to be. And I was alive, not erased, not forgotten.
Alive.
And this time, no one, no man, no lie, no betrayal would ever take that from me again.